YouTube, and welcome to Whiskey 411. I'll be your host today. I am the Baron, and today we're going to talk about a bourbon. So today's bourbon is one some of you have probably heard of, some of you may not, but that's okay because we're going to go in depth on it to tell you everything you never wanted to know. So today's bourbon is going to be Ironroot. So if you're not familiar with them, Ironroot is a distillery that's about 7 to 8 years old. They're located in Denison, Texas, which is in the northern part of Texas, not too far from the Oklahoma border. Now, they have been making amazing spirits for a long time, and many of their whiskeys have won awards. They've won Best Corn Whiskey, they've won just several awards, and they're really impressive. They're really nice. It's Robert and Jonathan Licorice and their mother Marcia are the ones who run it primarily, but their family all helps with it, and it's really cool. It's a really nice family affair. So for today's whiskey, I decided to go with Harbinger. So Harbinger is their standard issue bourbon. It's their main labeled bourbon. And of course, as you know, bourbons must be 51% corn at a minimum, and aged in new oak for an indeterminate length of time, and made in America. That's really the only standards for bourbon, and it lends to an interesting profile because there are so many notes that will be similar across bourbons, but many things that will change depending on the grains that each company used and in what combinations and how they aged it and what their barrels were charred at. A lot of factors go into making a good bourbon, and it's really hard to sometimes define what the difference between each bourbon is. Many of them are very similar. So this particular bottle is 122.4 proof or 61.2% alcohol. So it is a cask strength bourbon. This one was aged for 30 months in new oak. So it has, as you can see, it's gotten much of the barrel influence, as is very common in Texas. Texas whiskeys tend to take on color very quickly due to the hot climate, and that's something that lends its own unique character to many of the whiskeys that you'll find in Texas. It also allows them to sell whiskeys that are a bit younger because they've gotten more of that influence earlier. So let's go ahead and pour this, and we'll see if we can find things that are similar and things that are different between this and some of the other bourbons that you may have had. So, of course, they use corks, which is always a pleasant experience. I like the feel of the cork, even though it doesn't really make a difference from a quality standpoint. There's just something satisfying about the tactile feel of popping that cork. So we'll go ahead and do that. Pour that. There's the bottle. And of course, we're using a Glencairn glass. This is a standard issue one. These are generally about 5 to 6 ounce glasses, although the bulb down here, we usually have only about 1.5 ounces of whiskey, which is a very standard pour. It also, while it's not as concentrated as a small Glencairn, it does allow you to have more of the whiskey, to spend more time embracing the nuance of each whiskey that you're enjoying. So it has its benefits. It also has a slightly bigger knob so that you can hold it longer without warming your whiskey too much. Although warming your whiskey with your hands does release a lot of the nose and the smell elements, so that you can actually vaporizes it so that you can actually smell more of what the whiskey truly smells like. And so that's kind of something worth experimenting with sometimes. I prefer to drink my whiskey closer to room temperature, though, so I try to avoid holding it by the bulb, and I recommend doing that first with any new whiskey. So on the nose, it has a very classic bourbon smell. And by classic, I mean there's the standard cherry. There's that hint of vanilla that is so common. This is a very interesting nose. It's very well balanced. It has some things that jump out, but there's also enough subtlety that I want to keep going back to it. So we're going to just sit here and explore the nose. And there's different ways of doing that. So you can see that I'm doing just the glass to the nose. Sometimes you can do the swirl to help free that up and open it up a little bit in the glass. And of course the shape, the tulip shape of the glass helps you to helps to direct all those smells directly into your nose so that you can get that sense of nuance. So I definitely get the sense of a dusty corn or grain kind of smell. You do find that in a lot of bourbons. Good quality bourbons, even high quality bourbons, you'll find that note. It's very common. I enjoy it because it reminds me of when I was a kid and I grew up around farms. And so it kind of takes me back to childhood when I get that smell. And I think that's really enjoyable for me. Some of you may have had that experience as well. So there's a little hint of cinnamon. And there's a hint of fruit. Now I'm trying to determine what that fruit is to me. At first blush, it reminds me of an apple. Now I'm not sure what kind, but it's a type of red or sweet apple on the nose. And of course you do get a little hint of the alcohol, a little bit of influence from the alcohol in the nose, just being from the high proof. That 61.2% is a bit of bang for your buck. So if you're new to tasting and nosing whiskeys, it may hit you a little hard at first, and that's okay. The key is just working till you can get past that. You may never get rid of it entirely, but you'll be able to find some nuance with practice. So always keep practicing at home. So there's almost a praline kind of vibe to it, like a candied sort of smell. And I do find that to be very enjoyable as well. Once again, this whole glass on the nose does many things to take me back to childhood and to make me feel younger again, which is always a pleasant experience for those of us who, had those memories from childhood that we really enjoyed. All right, so I think I've gotten as much as I can out of the nose for now. I will go back to it as I drink it, because you never know what you're going to notice the second or the third time after you've had the alcohol go through and across the palate. So what I like to do is just go ahead and start with a small sip. And on that first sip, I go very short, very small, and I just kind of let it sit on my tongue, and I think about the feel and the body of it and what my first impressions are. And as you can see, I just take a few seconds to do that and to roll it back across my tongue. That also helps me to acclimate to the alcohol, the high proof here. So if you're working on high proof, that's not a bad way to do it. You can take and just let it sit on your tongue for a few seconds, roll it back, and then see what you notice. So like I said, I'm not looking for notes on that first sip necessarily, but what I am noticing is that it's got a denseness to it. It does the same oil that I see that stands up in my glass. I get that kind of oily texture, and that oily texture helps the flavor to cling a little bit longer, which can be good or can be bad depending on the bourbon or the whiskey that you're drinking. In this case, I think it's a good thing. So now I'm going to take a sip and try to actually taste and see what I get note-wise. Okay. So on that first taste, I definitely get the vanilla, and I get that sort of cherry note. It's not overpowering. It's actually not a super strong cherry note, but it's there. Then it transitions, and I get a little bit of a little bit more sour cherry or a tart cherry, like an actual tart fruit, like biting into one. So it does kind of grow, and then I get that cinnamon flavor coming underneath. So a bit of heat, a bit of spice, just as a foundation for that flavor. Oddly enough, I actually had it sort of in the middle, it had a melon flavor to me. And I don't notice that in a lot of whiskeys, but I do notice it occasionally. And I find that it's not an unusual note, but it's not a note that people name a lot either. So now, of course, the next step is we're going to take another sip and see what else we notice. And as you can see, as I've acclimated to the whiskey, I can keep it in my mouth a little bit longer, which allows me to explore that a little bit longer. Now, I wouldn't recommend keeping it in your mouth overly long because the alcohol will start to burn the taste buds on your tongue a little bit, and you'll lose some of that character and nuance that you're actually trying to get. So there's a fine line. So you have to be a little careful when drinking high proof like that. Now on that, I definitely got more of the melon. When I say melon, I'm thinking like in the realm of like cantaloupe or honeydew, something like that. Not a watermelon. Something sort of creamy and rich, but with that sort of lift, that light lift of a flavor that you get from some of those melons. It's very enjoyable. Yeah, so there is definitely the vanilla. I actually get that musty or dusty note on the mid palate and going through the finish. I assume that's partly barrel influence, just based on what I'm tasting. It has the characteristics of what I think of when I get that oak, that dry charred wood, which is really pleasant. It's there as a pleasant thing, so it has the barrel influence that you expect from an older whiskey. In fact, like that, what you would get from say a 8 or 10-year-old bourbon. It definitely has a lot of character from the cask. And once again, depending on your perspective, you may find that to be really enjoyable, like I do. So like I said, I'm going to go back to the nose imparting taste, of course. And so now I'm getting sort of a streusel kind of vibe. And when I say that, I mean you still have the cinnamon, you have like the crumble, the little bit of sweetness, and it's all there, and it's not overly sweet, but it's kind of like breakfast sweet, if you will. Once again, very enjoyable. So on the taste, yeah, it's all coming through. As I've acclimated more, I get more and more of the cinnamon. I enjoy that cinnamon flavor. And when I say cinnamon, I don't mean like cinnamon candy. I'm referring definitely more to like a cinnamon stick or a cinnamon powder that you would get on like a cinnamon roll or something like that. Some form of processing or natural cinnamon, but not cinnamon candy. So that's what I'm referring to. So, what do I like about this whiskey? Well, this whiskey starts by taking me to my childhood. And it takes me and makes me feel younger, and it reminds me of enjoyable times that I had, with family and doing things on the farm and things like that. And then on the taste, it does something similar, where it takes me to, um, you know, cooking in the kitchen, cooking desserts with the baking spices and the cinnamon and the fresh fruit and summertime. So I find that this particular whiskey is very enjoyable and very um, reminiscent of just being around family, being around my grandparents, my mom, whatever, just hanging out in the kitchen, doing things together. Uh, it's all very it's got subtlety, it's got nuance, and for 61% alcohol, it's surprisingly approachable. It does have some heat and some spicy areas, for lack of a better word, and it may not be for a new whiskey drinker right off the bat, but it's definitely one worth exploring. Mm. Now, as I said, one of the best ways to truly explore a whiskey is to spend 15 minutes, 30 minutes, what have you, going through and exploring it. Now, a lot of times what I would do is add a little water to this. In fact, I can go ahead and do that, and we'll see what it does. So, when you're proofing down your whiskey in the glass that you've already poured, you want to be careful. You don't want to add too much too soon. So what we're going to do is just take and just a couple of small drops in there. Oops, way too much. But that's okay. It's a very strong alcohol. It will stand up to the water much better than one that is already proofed down to, say, 45 or 47%. So we're going to give this a little swirl. And on the nose, it definitely opens it up. There's more caramel. There's more fruit and vanilla. That being said, the alcohol vapor is much more noticeable after proofing it down by adding that little bit of water to it. So that did thin it out quite a bit. I think I proofed it down a little too far, but that's okay. Um, it is still a perfectly drinkable whiskey at this proof, much more approachable. So if you're new, that might be what you would do, is go ahead and proof this one down at first. Although I always recommend trying at bottle strength first, just to see how it affects you and your palate initially. So it brought up the fruit. There's more of an apple, that sort of sweet apple, Fuji apple, apple pie kind of flavor. It did bring the alcohol burn up a little bit, as in it's a little more sharp, a little more noticeable, but it's not overpowering. So all in all, I like this one both ways. I think you could go either way with this, and it's a very enjoyable whiskey no matter your level, just depending on if you're willing to proof it down a little bit. Anyway, I hope this has been a very informational and enjoyable video for you. I hope you've learned a lot about bourbons, and this particular bourbon in particular. If you get the chance, you should definitely check out Ironroot. They're located in Texas, so if you're in Denison or near Denison, you should definitely stop by and visit them. Otherwise, they do have distribution in many states now, and they're working on getting more all the time. But you can find them at Total Wine and places like that. But whenever possible, always stop by the distillery and buy straight from them if you can. There's nothing better than straight off the tap, so to speak. And it's just an amazing experience when you do visit them. They really care about their customers, and that is really awesome. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you for taking the time and spending your day with me. I look forward to doing more reviews for you in the future. And in the meantime, between now and then, I hope you guys do great things and share them with your friends. And here's to good friends, good times, and good whiskey. Cheers to you guys. Thanks for watching. And as always, please like and subscribe and tell your friends.